that doctor in there. All right. I'm with Dr. Camilo Ortiz, everybody. Welcome to Walk-Ins Welcome. It is a pleasure to be able to sit down and talk with you today. How are you doing?
Thanks so much for having me. Doing great.
First
Excited
of
to talk.
all, I'm excited to talk to you about all the things, therapy, anxiety in children. But first off, I want to start with something more random. Is your daughter like a burgeoning rock star?
She appears to be, and it's a shock to us all because we know how rare this is. But she had this very clear plan from a few years ago, and it actually is happening exactly as she had hoped, and she works her butt off. So this is not just luck, but certainly some luck is involved. But I think she's really great, and she just played her biggest venue ever a couple of weeks ago, which is Forest Hill Stadium in Queens, which is where we go for concerts because we live nearby. And then I saw my daughter up on stage. It was quite surreal.
That must be so wild. Yeah, I was checking out some of her stuff because I feel like in an alternate timeline of my life, that was the calling that I missed, was being a singer and a songwriter. And that's just so cool. And it's so cool because it's not something that, it's such an unstable career path that it's really cool to see that she has parents who support her in that. I think oftentimes it's not always the case.
No. So I'm an immigrant to this country, and being a rock star was not on the list of things that I could have even thought about doing because you just want to survive when you first
Right.
get here. So it is a privilege she has, but I'm happy to support her in that.
It's funny.
And there's a little psychology. She tends to sing about existential issues like dying and not being wanted, and so it's kind of cool to see that aspect of it.
Yeah, there's I hear this all the time from comedians who are their parents were immigrants and they're like, we are not this was not the plan our parents had for us when they came to America.
Yes,
Like, you're going to
I had to
become
be
a
flexible.
comedian. Yeah. The complete opposite of what you were supposed to do with all of this privilege. Where are you from originally?
So I was born in Colombia, South America, and I came to this country as a little kid. So Spanish was my first language, and most of my family is still in Colombia.
Okay. Colombian Spanish is like a different Spanish than all the other Spanishes.
We tend to think it's the best, but I
Do
realize
you?
that that's a little self-centered.
I feel like that's the same thing my Argentinian bosses would have said back in the day. They would always be like, they're not speaking, that's Oaxacan, that's not Spanish.
That's right. We feel the same way.
Yeah. It's just so fast. The Colombian Spanish is very hard for me to, usually I can kind of catch some of it and get a general sense. I have enough of a Spanish background that I understand a lot more than I'm, capable of speaking. And I'm often just embarrassed, which is always it holds you back from getting good. And with Colombians, I'm like, what are you saying? You're speaking so fast.
That's how I feel about Dominicans. I can barely keep up. So interesting.
That is really, yeah, it gives you such a different perspective on everything when you weren't born in America. I do think like being married to, and I've spoken about this before, being married to a man, my first husband was Belarusian, and we got married quite young. I don't know that we would have even gotten married that young if we kind of didn't have the like threat of him being taken away hanging over our heads, but we did. And just being able to kind of view America through his eyes and hear about his upbringing and see him laugh at a lot of the ridiculous things Americans get upset and kind of outraged about. It in those like young 20s of mine was extremely formative. I don't think I've ever really let go of that worldview. It's somewhere in me. We were together for 5 years, so just kind of living watching him take in The Simpsons and yeah, it was really I'm grateful for that because it was kind of like when I went to rehab really young too, actually. It was just a different perspective on America that I don't know that I would have had if I had just like followed the right path that I was
Yeah.
supposed to follow.
I'm forever thankful for my somewhat difficult upbringing. So not only was I an immigrant, but we were quite poor for my entire childhood. And I used to, as a kid, hate that every day. And now I'm so happy because it makes me, once you get out of that for the rest of your life, I think you're better off for it because you
Mm.
appreciate everything so much more.
Yeah, I do think, and you're the psychologist here, so you can probably speak better to this than I can. The poverty mentality is very hard to, like that scarcity mentality. I've talked to a lot of people about how hard that is to overcome, even when things are okay. There's this
Yeah.
sense that you'll be back in poverty again, or the rug will get pulled out from underneath you. It's like kids who grow up in a lot of dysfunction have that like fear of it all being taken away essentially. How do you get over that, or have you?
No, I have not.
Oh, okay.
And my kids will make fun of me about this all the time. And my wife, who was born here but comes from Chinese immigrants, has the exact same mentality. And we were just making fun of her yesterday because she ate leftovers from like a week ago that clearly were obviously going to make her sick. And she spent all day being sick. And it reminded me of this Simpsons episode, speaking of the Simpsons, where Homer is nursing this like hoagie that is 5 feet long and it's purple and brown and he won't stop eating it and he's getting sicker and sicker. And it was just a perfect example. Well, we're never going to get over that.
Yeah, that's I wonder, I was writing about being from divorce and I forgot until it's probably I'm like, whoa, maybe I should write a book about this because I was talking about how divorce never ends. You talk a lot about divorce for kids and how that affects them when they're young, but both my husband and I are from divorce. And so there are 8 sets of grandparents between the two of us that we're trying to navigate, and they all want a piece of the grandchild, and some of them won't even be in the same room with each other. And it is, I'm like, I'm still dealing with you emotionally. Like, still, I'm dealing with this, and I'm in my 40s. It never ends. But I was talking about how when we were kids, when we'd go visit my dad, we were really just like kind of on our own as like preteens and teens. And my aunt would find us like rummaging through the cupboards of my grandmother's house where there was never notoriously any food, and eating raw spaghetti and drinking pickle juice. Because my husband doesn't understand why I like cannot throw food away. He's like, what is this? I will be up at 2 o'clock in the morning cooking so that like stuff doesn't go bad. He's like, what is this psychosis that you have?
If it makes you feel any better, I think there are good evolutionary reasons for this. So the people who hold on to these things tend to actually be better at surviving when the next inevitable famine comes, and the people who are carefree. And I say this to my patients all the time. There were probably not many surfer dude kind of cavemen around who would look at the sky and look at how beautiful it was. They would walk off a cliff, or they would get eaten by an anaconda hanging out behind a bush. Whereas the nervous ones were miserable, but they tended to pass on their genes. So we are the beneficiaries
Mm,
of nervous ancestors. Our genes don't care at all about us being happy. They all just
interesting.
they just, if we want to think about it that way, they just care about replicating. And if we're miserable in replicating, they will take that all day long.
Right. As long as you're replicating.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
and
is.
anxiety
I'm
is a
a,
great example of that. Is it helps you
oh,
replicate, but it makes you miserable.
It can. I'm a very anxious person by nature, I think. Like as a child, I'm the oldest. I think that has something to do with it because there was the oldest of five. Like some kid was always eating a mushroom or falling down the stairs, or like I still do it on the beach, and my siblings all laugh at me. I'm like always counting the heads of the kids. And I was like, look, guys, this was my whole entire childhood. It was like counting heads, okay? And I do think that I don't want to like pass that on to my daughter. I want to try but even yesterday the like weather here was very sketchy yesterday. We're in Texas. So it's been tornadoes and whatnot. We were at our little gym where she's little. It's like her little place where she goes to try and she's 2. So she's like tumbling and getting to know her body.
Yeah.
And trying to build some of that confidence. And then the lights started flickering and there was this creepy like kid music on, and all of the like dust in the parking lot was swirling in tornadoes. And I was like, we're going to die.
I've seen that
I wouldn't
movie.
let her stand near the windows. I was like the weird parent that's like, let's go play in the back.
Yeah. So this is the existential question for parents. And this is something that I deal with a lot in my research and my clinical work, is like, at what point does protecting and helping actually become harmful to kids? And it's not obvious. And
No.
also it is complicated because a lot of the stuff that we do in the short term makes kids safer. In the long term, deprives them of the practice they need with things like danger. So one of the things it might be strange for a child psychologist to be suggesting dangerous activities for parents to allow their kids to do, but I do it all the time. Because if I take a long-term view, more practice with danger actually will make kids safer.
I think they get better at navigating it too. We've always given her kind of a long leash. She must have hit some, I don't know enough about developmental stages, but she was kind of fearless and then hit 2. And now it's like, oh, everything, she's in like, everything's scary. She's in that phase. And so and now she's learning how to swim, and like, it's just like, I'm trying to like push her to do these things, and know her own limits, but she's still 2. It's like that weird, I've spent enough time in the third world where it's like, we really do bubble wrap our children here. They'll be like on the back of motorbikes, 5 of them stacked deep.
I know.
Yeah, and I'm like, these kids, I'll never forget this little 7-year-old selling shining shoes in Egypt, and I was like, what are you doing out late shining shoes? And he had to, and I'll never forget this little tot kid just running after the little horse and buggy and having the like older guys pull him up. I was like,
wow.
The person I was with, we were like, we should adopt him and then ruin him immediately. He'll be addicted to video games. He'll only speak one language.
He'll be obese.
He'll be fat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about exactly what you do. What's your background, and what are you doing now? Because it seems like you're doing quite a lot.
I am. That's also the immigrant in me, is I'm uncomfortable when I'm not doing something. So leisure is very uncomfortable for me. All right. So basics. I'm a professor of psychology at Long Island University. I also am what's called the clinical director at the Open Therapy Institute, which is a fairly new project that I'm involved with, and we can certainly talk about that. But it's in response to the politics invading the therapy room and activist therapists, which I think is a big problem. And so we created this place where people could go if they wanted a therapist who they could trust, would not try to indoctrinate them or judge them for their beliefs, and would focus on the problems that they bring in and not on the therapist's own agenda. So that's another thing I do. I also run a private practice where we see kids and adolescents and also adults for lots of different things, including anxiety and conduct problems. So when kids misbehave or non-compliant. And I'm trying to write a book on a new vision for parenting that really pushes against what we call intensive parenting ideology, which is this idea that more parenting is better. And I think that is clearly false. And we
Mm.
have gotten to a place where parents are more and more dissatisfied with their job as a parent, despite, if we look at the last 50 years, the amount of time parents spend with their kids has continued to go up. It is not no end in sight. And the amount of money parents spend on their kids also is going up, no end in sight. And kids are doing worse, and parents feel worse about their parenting. So I really want to push back against this to a what a good friend described as a parenting diet. That might be the name of my future book,
Mm.
where we are doing
Okay.
much less and getting better outcomes.
I always hear about this like good enough parenting.
Yeah,
You know,
similar
it's
idea.
yeah, I didn't know it was like an actual thing. I thought people just said that. They're like, "No, it's a real thing somebody came up with. I don't know his name, but you can probably explain it better than me."
For a very long time, this idea that at a certain level you don't really gain that much from extra work, extra parenting, and in fact you start losing things like child independence. And so that's the other thing that I do is I've created a new treatment for child anxiety that is pretty simple. It's based on daily doses of child independence, what I call mega doses of child independence. And so we take anxious kids, and instead of treating them with exposure therapy, which is the sort of frontline treatment for anxiety. So let's say you were scared of spiders, you would come into my office and we would play with spiders once a week.
Yeah.
Then you get better at that. But shocker, most kids don't want to do that. And instead, I say to them, what are some things you'd like to do independently that you don't do right now? And every kid has a bunch of things they want to do. And so we check with parents and we say, can we do one of these every day? And then we track their anxiety, and it tends to go down. The more stuff they do that is truly independent without a parent around, including things that are somewhat dangerous. And so that's probably the thing that I'm working on the most right now. I'm most excited about is this new treatment.
How old are these kids?
Middle school, late elementary school to early middle school. So like
Okay.
nine to 13. Although we have thought about what this would look like for younger kids and for older kids. But that's the sweet spot, I think, when anxiety disorders tend to emerge, and also helicopter parenting really sets in and starts clashing with kids who naturally want to be independent, but helicopter parents are not, they're frustrating that, leading to even more problems.
How come it's interesting because I think about my generation, I'm Gen X, and we were just my friend who's also Gen X, we're just talking about this, and I'm not sure how much of it is just technology, like being able to kind of track your kid, because we would go in at 7 a.m. The three of us would get on our bikes and go, and I was probably 13 or maybe not even 13, probably 12, which means my brother was 10 and my other sister who would come was probably 8. And so we would all get on our bikes, ride to the end of we lived in this very tiny little town in Connecticut. We'd go to the borough, we'd be there for 7 a.m. swim lessons. And then we would just be there all day long, the three of us by ourselves.
I mean,
And we'd
from
bike
my
around
perspective,
town.
amazing. That's the
Yeah.
best kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons we moved here. I mean, and I was talking to my brother about it. He has 3 kids and they're like old school kids. They just like go play. He's raising them like we were raised. And he was like, the thing that bothers him the most is that now there's no like pickup games anymore. Everything.
You don't even know what that means. You ask them, hey, is there a pickup game? What? They don't know
What is this? Like, why did you have to join a club this is why it's so much money. And it stresses parents out so much. The driving, all I hear about from parents of multiple kids is driving their kids around to all these activities. It's freaking insane. They're not going to go on to be like 90% of them aren't going to be star athletes or anything. They're just driving themselves literally crazy. And I'm wondering what's your kind of theory about why this, is it just like capitalism? Like, what is this?
Capitalism.
I
There's
love
so many.
capitalism, but what is this?
No,
I
I do
don't
too.
understand.
There's so many answers to that question, but one thing, if we sort of just go one step back, one of the things that we're seeing is basically the end of mixed age free play. So, colleague, psychologist Peter Gray in Boston has written about this a lot. And when we look at the percentage of kids who play with kids who are outside of their age, it really is almost non-existent.
Oh, wow.
You probably remember Little House on the Prairie if you're around my age, and
She was
so.
canceled, sir.
But before she was canceled,
I was like, this whole movement is dead to me. You came for Laura Ingalls Wilder. Yeah, I do remember it well. I
so
loved
they
it.
had one little schoolhouse, and if I
Yeah.
remember correctly, it was like kindergarten to 12th grade in the
Yeah.
same, and then they would go play together. And so that doesn't happen anymore. Play is segregated by age, and it also is adult driven now. And there's probably lots of reasons for why that happens. But when it's adult driven, that really restricts the benefits of play. And so if you remember when you were a kid, you'd play a game and you'd say, all right, so from here to there is inbounds, and then past that tree is out of bounds. And then someone would go, no, let's make it, this other tree is out of bounds. And you would have a discussion, even an argument. There'd be no adults to call on to decide for you. And these soft skills of empathy, negotiation, taking other perspectives, they're not really happening that much anymore. So I think it's pretty disastrous that we don't have free play, and in particular, we don't have mixed age free play. Why that? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, here's my one kind of not pushback, but just it's one of the things that we didn't have to grapple with when we were kids that now I see my friends grappling with, particularly friends with girls. They live in a neighborhood where it's kids everywhere and many different ages, and they're all playing. But her girls, who are right at that age of like tween, 10 and 8, I think, came back traumatized one day because the older boys were showing them TikTok videos of cats being hung. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how you navigate that when you want your kid to go play with other ages, and the other ages have cell phone. Like, how the F do you navigate that as a parent?
Yeah. So everything is more complicated now. That didn't used to even be an option before. I don't think that suggests that we shouldn't have mixed age interactions. And research really supports that both the older kids and the younger kids benefit from mixed age free play.
Oh yeah, I believe it. I'm just, and I'm on board with that. I just think I don't know how you would navigate these extra things that now you have to grapple with.
Well, I mean, I think they can be opportunities. And so, that's definitely unpleasant and uncomfortable. But, protecting kids from being uncomfortable is not the way to go. And so some of that, and having a discussion about how they want to handle that or what they might do in the future, can actually be helpful to them. So, I talk about what I call the 4 Ds, which I think are disappearing, and that's not one of the Ds, but they're discomfort, distress, disappointment, and danger are things that kids need lots of practice with.
And also boredom.
Boredom, yeah. Well, boredom can be uncomfortable.
Discomfort, yeah.
It can lead to discomfort. So, again, related to this idea of intensive parenting, that somehow we got it into our collective brains that good parenting meant protecting kids from the 4 Ds. And I'm really trying to flip that good parenting means giving them lots of practice with the 4 Ds, where you don't immediately step in to find a solution for them. And this might be a good example. Like, they are distressed, they come back, they say, they showed me these pictures. And instead of telling them what to do, you could have an open-ended discussion about some ideas, some options, and then they can go do it without you there. Yeah, in that situation, many parents would march right over and either tell the boys don't do that or call the boys' parents and say your kid did this to my kid. And I think that's just not a great idea. It doesn't teach your kids how to handle the billion other discomforts that are coming down the line
Yeah.
for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry to interrupt on that tangent, but go. So why else do you think? So there's the not be the not intermixing with other ages, but why else do you think there's only club play? You know, just like team sports, and you've got to sign up, and it's not cheap either. Holy crap!
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some sociologists talk about this being an abundance issues, that as our basic needs get taken care of, we don't think it's unlikely we'll starve anymore like we maybe 100 years ago could happen. Then we still have sort of like these, our brain still has functions that it needs to do, like protecting against danger and things like that. And so it's turning our attention to sort of the next step up in, if you've ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're not going to starve anymore. So what's the next thing? Maybe having relationships and friendships. And then what's the next thing? Self-actualization, and the next thing. And so our brains just need to be doing these things. They need to be looking for problems and solving them. And so this might be a function of abundance, which is a little depressing because there's no reason to think abundance is going to go down over time. And in fact, it probably will get even better from that respect. So it's, I don't think there's a simple solution to what to do. And we have these structural problems that lead parents to overparent. But the one part that I'm hoping I can do something about is the cultural assumption that more parenting is better. And if I, with lots of other people, I'm not the only person doing this. If we really push back against this idea, I think I'm optimistic we can make it better.
Yeah. We grew up very much. I've talked a lot about this. When I had Lenore Skenazy on, we talked about this, and she was laughing at what my aunts used to say. She's like, I might use that, but I just grew up with the parents being like, that's a kid problem. Like there was like the refrain, because there were so many of us. My dad's one of 10. So there were like 26 first cousins running around like lunatics, and we'd be like fighting and over a board game or something, and it'd be like, go work it out amongst yourselves. And I don't yeah, that's a kid problem.
Yeah, because this is again a very different assumption that if you're a good parent, you step in and mediate or negotiate. And I think it's such a bad idea, both from a child's mental health and also from a parent's mental health. I want parents to be far more selfish with their time. They should go out more. They should not be around their kids as much, and kids will figure this stuff out. And, speaking of Lenore, this independence treatment that I came up with is based on all of her ideas. She was doing this in classrooms with typically developing kids. And I said, well, what if we supercharge this independence idea and then administered it as a treatment to anxious kids? And that's where we are today. So I owe so much to Lenore.
She's great. I love her. She's just so funny. She told me to watch this Becoming You documentary on Apple TV. And I watched it over and over again the whole time I was pregnant. And because it follows 100 kids around the world through their first 5 years of development. And there's a 3-year-old who jumps off into the water, and, she's like off the coast of, it's like this Bajau tribe. There's like, they live on these stilt houses, and she's, my daughter has become like weirdly obsessed with the babies. She wants to see the babies doing all the things. So even today, like she went underwater and she came up and I was like, this is like the baby. Like
Oh,
she's
amazing.
seeing these like babies do all these things. And so I'm hoping that and she's just weirdly obsessed with this. And it's so hard. I mean, everyone who doesn't have kids is like the best parent. It's so hard to navigate. Even when we go to the gym, it's like I try to step back, it's like, how much because she's so young, I want her to just like, if she gets fixated on hanging on a bar, I want to give her that. But also, you want her to have to like learn how to be directed and do one thing after another because they'll do these little sequences
Yeah.
and focus. Like another thing that just seems like is getting shredded. And I've seen a lot of the stuff like Jonathan Haidt's book, and I've been joking, and I might start doing stand up about this. Like I get all these reels from people about my kids' screen time, and I'm like, maybe fucking look at your own screen time. You just sent me 25 reels, like. I feel like so much of this movement to like regulate social media is taking the onus off the parents and their own addiction to technology and putting it like either asking for the government to step in or asking for I'm very distrustful of this. I'm like, okay, can
Yeah.
we look at our own habits with this? Because that's where they're learning this.
Well, when I work with parents, this is specifically one of the things we do is we have phone free time, and it could really be an hour a day for everybody. Um, in defense of parents, it is worse for kids to be on a phone than for a fully developed adult. So it's not an
Totally.
equal playing field. So there is a reason to have different rules for different people. At the same time, I get lots of parents who are clearly addicted to a phone and are complaining that their kids are addicted to phones, and we have to start with them even for a little bit. And there are some pretty easy technological solutions to this. So with my router, in two presses of a button, I can set up a period of time every day automatically where the phones just don't work, and I don't have to be the bad guy and take a phone from my kids. It just stops working. And after about 2 days of complaining, they realize, oh, at 4 o'clock, this is what happens for an hour, and then they accept it. So there's some pretty easy things to do.
How old are your kids?
So my rock star daughter is 23 and my son is 17.
Okay. Yeah, so they're in it. They're in it. They're around the same age as I have a family member with kids the same age, almost exactly the same age as actually. And weirdly, they're like much more, they're much healthier with their phones than most adults that I know. That's why I will say, as much as like, yes, it's different developing brains and everything specifically for the younger kids. They seem, because it was something they grew up with, like they have a much more healthy relationship to it than like the boomers I know
That
who.
makes sense. And John Haidt talks about this, that when he surveys kids, a huge percentage agree that social media and cell phones are overall a bad influence on them, but they can't unilaterally leave the system if everybody else is still in it, because it's immediately punished, because then they don't know what anyone's doing. And so
Mm,
his solution makes a ton of sense, which is we have to attack this on a bigger scale. And the most obvious solution is no cell phones at school.
yeah,
I think that's
that
a no-brainer.
I was shocked to find out they were in schools from Abigail's book. I was like, what? I thought that would be like I was like, kids are allowed to have phones just all day in school? That's crazy to me.
They are. Yeah. What's a nice way to think about this? I mean, let's just say school administrators don't always have, but let's say they're under a lot of pressure from parents. And so making difficult decisions like no cell phones will often receive a lot of pushback, and it's not easy for them to stay firm. Let's
Mm,
put it that way.
that's the nice thing. So it's actually coming from the parents.
Well, when school administrators say, "Let's try having no cell phones," they will immediately get 50 emails from incensed parents. So what if there's a school shooter, I want to hear my kid's last words. You can't do
I know.
that.
I have a dark joke. When all of this was going around, I had to like stop myself from quote tweeting one of Jonathan's things about no cell phones in schools with like, but how will the kids reach out to their parents in the school shooting? And then someone's like, no, that's like a real thing that parents call
It
with.
absolutely is. Yes.
Oh, that's dark.
Well, this is where our brains are designed to go to exactly that place, and they
Yeah.
don't. So this is another. We're very good at identifying the risks of things happening. We're very bad at identifying the risks of inaction. So, like when we talk about increasing independence in kids, parents can rattle off 10 different things that can happen to a child when they're not with an adult, but they have a hard time understanding what will happen if a child never has independence. So they will be less good at problem solving. They will have worse social skills. They will have less grit. It's hard for parents to see that because these are things that won't happen, or there'll be less of them, as opposed to the big bad outcome that is obvious to everybody. So it's an
Mm.
unfair fight when I try to push independence. I sometimes get pushback, but I actually use Lenore. I don't know if you've ever seen the YouTube video about her son's story of taking the subway. Um, but I use that in my first session with parents, and most of them cry when they see this beautiful story of what happened with her son when she allowed independence, and then they're more open to the idea.
Mm.
Called Off the Rails. If your listeners want to see it on YouTube, it's a 10-minute YouTube. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yep. It is just, and being a parent is so terrifying.
Yeah.
It really was like the first. I feel like it's something I used to kind of really judge helicopter parents until I became a parent, and now I'm like, I get it. I completely get it.
Oh, yeah.
And I've talked a lot to this guy who wrote maybe my favorite book of like forever. He wrote this book, Mediated. His name's Thomas De Zengotita, and he has this whole theory called Justin's helmet principle, which is essentially like, why does every generation seem to kind of bubble wrap their kids more and more? But if all the kids are wearing helmets, and you know that wearing a helmet is going to prevent them from maybe getting a concussion, you don't want to be the one parent that doesn't have a helmet on your kid, because now you're just a irresponsible asshole. So there's like a social component to it as parents too.
Yes. The protectiveness ratchets up with each generation, and almost like a ratchet, you can't go back down once
Mm-hmm.
that's the new normal. And then you can even sort of like get extra, what we might call it, social capital, if you go even above and beyond what is typical, because then you're a really good parent. And then everybody tries to catch up, and we end up in a place that doesn't make much sense, which I think we are in that place now.
I have seen a lot of ads on Instagram selling me, little stoves for 2-year-olds and stuff. Like they're like working stoves and
Oh, they're
whatnot.
working. Okay.
No,
Good.
it's like I've seen a lot. There does seem to be a kind of movement to letting kids do more of this stuff independently. So I'm seeing this, and maybe it's just the algorithm knows that I like that content because I'm always looking at homesteading things, even though I also like getting things in like 24 hours. My algorithm is a disaster, but but I do think I love like that. I like all that like Montessori stuff. I really love. And now I've seen all these videos of kids like making eggs, and they're like 2 and stuff. So
Are they making eggs alone, or are mom and dad right next to them
no, they're
making the eggs?
making eggs alone.
Okay, that's good, because I see a lot of this stuff, and it is
I
just
mean, their
another.
parents are videotaping them, so I don't know what that's doing to them, like their brain, but
Yeah, well, I mean, when we design independence activities, parents cannot even be in the physical location, because
Mm.
we actually want things to go wrong sometimes. So I'll give you one example. There was a 9-year-old girl who was one of the first people we put through the independence therapy, and she would not sleep alone in her own bed. But she decided she wanted to take the Brooklyn city bus to school by herself at age 9. And her parents bravely allowed this. It was terrifying for them. The dad was looking through the shades to make sure she wasn't kidnapped, even though the bus stop was right in front of their house. But she gets on the bus and she's going to school. She has a cell phone, which we didn't have when I was a kid, but she misses her stop and her cell phone's like not working or something. And a lady next to her says, "Oh, honey, it looks like you're a little upset. Is everything okay?" And she said, "Yeah, I think that was my stop." And she said, "Oh, okay, you just get off right here and you just walk 2 more blocks and you'll be at school." And so she gets off and she gets to school, no problem. Now, as I'm listening to this story, I'm thinking, amazing. I could not have designed it better. I want things to go wrong because that's the zone where kids really grow. When there's nobody there, no parent who can help them, they have to figure it out. So she gets to school. She took the bus home and then she marched in and said, "I'm going to sleep in my bed tonight." And nobody said anything to her. And then when I asked her about it when we met the next week, she said, "I took the bus to school. I don't need to sleep in my parents' bed anymore." And this
Mm.
is exactly like the theory that we were hoping, that we could help make anxiety better without even directly addressing that anxiety. We didn't talk to her about sleeping alone in her bed. So traditional exposure therapy would have been like, well, let's try sleeping with the door open. Let's try sleeping with the light on in your own bed, and then we'll make it more difficult over time. We skipped all of that by giving her this mega dose of much more difficult independence, where things went wrong, and that was probably what actually helped the most. And then she was sleeping in her own bed.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
so it doesn't
amazing.
happen every time, but that's the sort of best case scenario, and it has happened quite a bit.
Mm. I love that. Terrifying,
Yes,
but
not easy, and these
no.
parents, I think, are superstars for doing what's difficult, but they realize that this is not sustainable to always be next to your child.
No. And I I do think, like, back to my childhood where we would all just be, like, jumping off rocks while our parents were all drinking on the beach. Like, I was like, no one seemed to care that we were just it was, like, borderline neglect probably, but it was also very, it made us all very, very independent in
Yes, and it's
ways.
not without risk. I never guarantee anybody that these things have no risk. But again, it's this equation. There is risk if we don't do this stuff. It's not as
Yeah.
obvious. And so then it becomes, which risk do we want? Are we more comfortable with? And I think if you realize there's risk on the other side, then it's not so obvious that you should always be hovering.
Yeah, it's so hard to like you said, the like active. I really was like faced with this when I was pregnant and everybody wanted me to get the COVID vaccine. And I was like, for some reason, the act of taking it was far more terrifying to me than not taking it.
Mm.
Even though there might be a ramification for not taking it,
Yeah,
I was much more terrified of the act of taking it. And that I was
yeah,
like, I know this is not logical, but I don't know. And my husband was trying to explain to me, like, there's something about what you were explaining earlier, like there's something about making the choice to do something as opposed to being passive and not doing something. Those, like, that risk evaluation is very different.
yeah. I mean, there's a long history of how our brains tend to be somewhat irrational in assessing risk and measuring different risks. Um, so not surprised, but we just have to be prepared for that when we talk to parents about increasing independence, because if we're not going to have tools to answer their very reasonable questions. Uh,
Mm,
but so far, have been pretty successful. It's actually the adults that get in the way of independence therapy are not the parents. They are well-meaning strangers on the street who are like, "Hey, kid, what are you doing here by yourself?" And so this is something else I stole from Lenore, which is she has these little ID cards that say like, "I'm a let grow kid. I'm allowed to be here," and kids sign the back of them. And we've been using those, and the kids love them because they flash them like a badge at adults who are interfering. And so, like we had a kid take the Long Island Railroad, and the conductor said, I don't think you're allowed to be here by yourself. And we had researched this, and we knew that the age limit was below where this child was. And he flashed his badge, and the conductor let him stay on the train. And so it's well-meaning adults actually who are the
I
biggest.
mean, yeah, you hear these crazy stories about moms getting like the child protective services called
Yes.
on them because their kid was playing in the like cul-de-sac by themselves.
Absolutely. This is a real risk. And
Yeah, it's
so
crazy.
another thing Lenore has been doing is helping to pass free-range parenting laws in different states that decriminalize purposeful, well-meaning, free-range parenting.
Like normal old school
Yeah,
parenting.
we didn't have to used
But
to have
that's
these laws.
crazy that you have to decriminalize it.
Yes.
How did these laws get passed?
Not exactly my area of expertise, but I think it's well-meaning adults, and with one kid something goes wrong, and they go, well, we need a law about that, and that way we will protect other kids. But again, they don't think of the other side of the equation. What are we taking away from kids when we protect them from this or from that? We're not made to think that way.
So tell me about the what is it called again?
Open Therapy Institute.
Open Therapy Institute, because I have been rage tweeting for years about stories I've heard from friends who have gone to see therapists who judged them for their COVID vaccine choices, for supporting Trump. The stories I've heard are insane. And then hearing what my husband went through, getting his master's, and like at some of the the stuff they made them do in college, it's baffling to me. And even I always use this example. I'm in 12-step, and I was in a meeting, and this stuff is so invasive. It's everywhere. And this woman was lecturing everybody. She was asked to speak, but she was lecturing everybody about their privilege, essentially. And she's like, we need to do better. We need to do better in these rooms. There's only, 7 out of every 10 people are white. I'm like, so the average, that's like statistically the population of America. And I'm like, so what you're saying, and you don't realize you're saying it, is we need more addicts of color? Like, what? This shit is so toxic. Yeah. What is happening right now? How is this everywhere? And it's toxic in places like 12-step. Like, how can you be telling someone who's in there, if they're white, off of a meth bender who's lost everything, about like talking to somebody about their privilege in that moment seems like and also people going to therapists and having the therapist address the like power dynamic, or talk to me about how crazy this.
How much time do you have?
It's insane.
So I'm a college professor, and so I see this all the way back into college, and I also teach doctoral students who are training to become psychologists. So I see this in the end of their training, and then I see it in private practice. So what's the best way to sort of address this? Well, let me just start with, traditionally, psychologists and other therapists were taught that therapy is a very particular kind of relationship, and you as a therapist are there to help the client with what their goals are, and in return for that you get paid. And that's where the interaction ends. You are not supposed to get anything personal out of this relationship. It is for the client. Now, obviously, there are great things about being a therapist. You learn about yourself, you learn about the world, but it is not an explicit purpose that the client is there to suit your own needs in any way. And in fact, it has always been drilled into our heads from an ethical standpoint that it is unethical to turn. That's what friends are for. Friends are an equal relationship back and forth. This is not a friendship. And I think there were some good reasons why in the 60s and 70s and 80s, some people brought up the idea that the therapy relationship exists in a broader society, and we can't pretend like there are not societal forces that are affecting a person's mental health. And that's okay. But somehow that turned into, we must not only acknowledge the effect of societal forces, we must use the therapeutic relationship as a change agent to make changes outside into the world. And
Right.
that changes everything about what's happening in the therapy room. And I
Yeah, because it's
think it pollutes
activism.
it. It becomes activism because
Yeah.
then, like, how do you decide uh, when there's a clear power dynamic between a therapist and a client? How do you decide what societal changes are worthy of addressing and how you do that? It's going to default to the expert in the room. And that leads to all kinds of problems, including things like, I've had esteemed colleagues who I worship and have followed their work for 40 years. I've heard them say it's unethical to treat a Trump supporter. Right. And so what does that mean? Like half the country, if they have a mental illness and they come to you, you're going to send them away because of who they voted for. It like distorts our thinking in ways that would never make sense. And so we became very concerned about that. And so we wanted a place, this Open Therapy Institute, where people could reach out to us and say, we want people who are well trained and who agree with the principles of non intervention from
Hmm.
a political standpoint, from the therapist to the client. Can you give us some referrals? And so we're building this nationwide referral base. And we hope to do other things, including trainings for therapists and for non-therapists. And it could be really big. We're really excited about it. But
I'm
it's kind of
excited about
sad
it.
that we even need this.
You shouldn't need it.
Yeah.
You shouldn't need it. And how are you? Do you worry about losing your license or anything like that? Because I know that's a real fear in some states, like particularly around like the gender ideology and stuff like that. I think like in California, if you don't practice gender affirming care and affirm whatever the patient comes in with, you're in danger of losing your license. And that's like a
Yeah.
big deal. I think that's how so many people have kind of gone along with this, even if they weren't on board.
Yes, that's a concern. But I think if you do therapy correctly, which is to focus on what the client wants out of that relationship, you can do things that you don't agree with politically, because that's the whole point of the Open Therapy Institute. It doesn't matter what I think politically. You're here for this problem and that problem. So let me help you with attaining those goals in your life. Now, if your goals contradict my ethics, so what I tell my students jokingly is, if a client comes in and says to me, I want to be a better serial killer, I would say to them, I'm not going to help you with that. But there are very few exceptions where someone would come in with a goal that is directly in contrast with my ethics, that I would not help them with. Almost anything, even if I really disagree with it politically, I'm still going to help you if that's
Mm-hmm.
your goal. So
Mm-hmm.
if you practice that way, which is how we have always practiced for 100 years, I think you're fairly safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And have you received any pushback for like, you were very heavily featured in Abigail's book, and have you received have you lost friends, colleagues?
I have, but not from Abigail's book, because I've been pretty clear about my stances on the problems with politics in my field. And so I did previously lose friends for stances that I had, but interestingly, not from Abigail's book. And in fact, people have reached out to me for consultation or advice on things. So it's been great.
Good. That's really
I think
good.
once you kind of like, and I teach this to my students, once you don't immediately apologize and back away, people people will move on to an easier target. And so
Yeah.
it actually is not that hard to not get canceled if you don't play a role in the cancellation yourself by making it
Yeah.
worse.
I agree.
Yeah.
I've seen that a lot. A lot of people could have like weathered things if they had just chilled out and been like, I'll let this pass. Because
Yeah. People have
it's like the
two
flu.
second. Right. Yeah, sure. Exactly. We,
It
we have
just,
we have very little attention spans, and so we can actually use that in our favor when people are mad at us.
And when it happens, it feels so overwhelming. You know, it feels like it's all about you, and it feels so, but it's like, this will pass. I always say,
Yeah.
what would Jay-Z and Beyonce do? I'm like, look at them. They're like some of the most famous people in the world, and her sister punched him in an elevator, and they never said a freaking word.
Right.
And
Well, this is something else we've done with the Open Therapy Institute is we're starting to think of almost like trainings or group therapy for people who have been canceled or are attempting to be canceled. A, for a community, because you feel so alone when this happens, but B, there are specific things that you can do in both of those situations that can make it much easier on yourself. And we have some expertise in that, so I'm hoping we develop that a little more.
does some people are a lot of people still getting canceled?
No, I don't think as much. Although, if you're aware of Greg Lukianoff and Fire, he's been tracking cancellations at universities, and the last I checked with the numbers, they were not significantly down. So I think it's still happening. I think a much more common situation, and I hear this a lot from former students who are now in psychology practices, is that they just have to do a lot of pretending. They have to nod their heads. They have to pretend to agree with whatever nonsense is being spouted. And if they don't, they get called in and have a talk with the director, but they're not getting fired. So is that a step in the right direction? Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe, but it's still like, I don't know. Then it like somehow, I don't know.
Well, it makes
Maybe.
it an awful place to work if you can't be yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, it's weird. There's this balance of like, there's always been a level of kind of nodding your head and going along in college or and in work situations just to keep the peace. You don't generally talk about politics and things like that, but this seems different. It's like nodding along with stuff that you know is wrong, or I don't know. You're at least when people are getting canceled, they'd get fired. I think they realize that canceling people, because now it's like a cool thing, and it can actually give you more notoriety and money. And the best thing you can do is really ignore them and not fire them, and really just make them more compliant by a lot. It's like nodding along and then getting kind of a talking to is almost worse, because it allows it to kind of fester still.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's good they're not getting fired, but I had an editor. One of my first most brilliant editor was always like, "Die on your own sword." You know, it's like, it just like, if you're gonna have to go down.
Totally agree with that. The worst is when someone who you admire and who has been brave immediately crumbles at the first sight of cancellation and apologizes and this and that. I was speaking to a book editor about a book, and I said to them, just check out my tweets just so we make sure there's no issue. And she said, we're all about free speech. Unless you've threatened someone with violence, it's not an issue. And then within an hour, and my tweets are not particularly inflammatory. I talk about lots of silly psychological things. She said, yeah, we can't work together anymore. And I said, I'm so curious, which particular tweet offended you so much? And she didn't reply.
What?
So it still happens. Yeah.
Was this like a big publisher?
It was a big academic publisher.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's okay. I'll get a bigger publisher.
I mean, it's okay. It's just like, geez, Louise. Yeah. I don't know. I keep thinking it seems to me like it's getting better, but then I'm like, is it getting better? Or is it actually getting worse? And I just don't know it, because they're making it seem like it's getting better. Like culturally, it feels like there's been a bit of a break in the dam, but I don't know, on an institutional level, it feels like even some of the stuff like the administration has just, this particular administration has just pushed through bureaucracy, like the AB5 in California, which is now, they've essentially made it impossible to be an independent contractor. And they just pushed that through the Labor Department. And now we're seeing the EDD in California just recently on Friday announced that you can't use loan outs in like for above the line talent. So producers, writers, actors can't use loan outs, S Corps, Incorporated, whatever. Mind you, everyone in the entire entertainment industry uses loan outs because otherwise you're getting taxed and they have to pay payroll taxes and for like one day of work. So you'd have to fill out a W-2 and then you can't write off your agent. You can't write off your lawyer. You can't do any write-offs if you're on a W-2. So they just quietly announced this on Friday. And I'm like, people don't realize what a massive deal this is, but it's like AB5 through the back door. So stuff like this, that's very insidious, using bureaucracy to make these kind of changes that don't allow people to be independent, that affect usually independent contractors, small businesses, any place where there's it's not just with kids. Like this is a societal, there's like collectivism or something is like, is it, so I don't want to go all James Lindsay, but is it communism everywhere that we're just like putting fires out? Like, is this?
Yeah. I don't know if it's communism, but one thing that I talk about with people is whether our institutions are worth saving or whether we just need to start brand new ones. And with the professional organizations that we have in psychology, it's become pretty clear to me that they cannot be saved because the people now put in place are they're going to be there for decades and they're not budging, and their very jobs depend on continuing these policies. So something like the Open Therapy Institute is a brand new institution that we hope will replace some of the professional organizations we have.
And what about like the all the people who make the recommendations, like the DSM and the American Society of Pediatricians and I mean, these are like big institutions and they have a lot of influence.
And there's no obvious way to replace them. So this is a big problem. But universities might even be. There's not an obvious way to replace all the universities. I mean, the University of Austin is a good example, but that's one place. And how many ideologically captured universities are there in the United States? Thousands. So I don't know. I have people who are very pessimistic about where we're going. I tend to have I'm an immigrant again, so I tend to have an optimistic viewpoint on things. I think we can make things better, but I respect those who disagree.
I think we can too. And I have seen a lot of pushback just locally, even like I said, on this kind of movement to homeschooling your kids, this movement to, and not even homeschooling individually, like having these pods. There's a big homesteading movement. A lot of the biggest tech people who moved to Austin all have land outside of Austin and are having like these free range kids and chickens and whatnot, growing food. People want to learn how to grow food again. I see that movement towards that. I'm not sure that, I don't know. It's a very strange time in America in general. But it does feel like... I want to
know what happens when robots are everywhere.
When robots are everywhere?
How that's going to change. Are we going to have robot babysitters following around our kids everywhere? What are the implications for artificial intelligence for the things that we've been talking about? I have no idea, but I know they're probably going to be big implications.
Do you think there will be like robot nannies? in our
Yes,
lifetime?
definitely.
Really?
I mean, if you just look at Tesla's newest robots, their capabilities are exponentially increasing, and so I think it's going to be so fast that we're going to be shocked with what happens that we can't even predict.
No.
that's
This has
that's the
always
answer.
been
No.
This has always been I have this ongoing joke on Dumpster Fire about like stockpiling sand. I'm like, you need to be stockpiling sand. And then recently someone was like, there's a sand shortage. I'm like, the elites are listening to me. I'm like, the only thing you can use as a weapon against technology is sand. It like renders them completely unusable. We need
Or
to
you
just
like throw sand at the robots and they stop.
this is
Okay.
my big plan.
Wow.
Like train
I've never heard that one.
falcons and throw sand at robots. It's not great. It's not
Okay.
great, doctor.
Okay. That's something. We have to start somewhere.
No, it is weird. And I joke about this with my daughter. I'm like, should I be training her to like grow food, or should I be training her to go to Mars? Which I guess you would need to know how to grow food there too. But it feels like, is the grid gonna go down and we're gonna be set back and, you know, fighting for
Yeah.
whatever resources, or what?
Well, not my area of expertise, but some smart people I've spoken to have said that there's a low but non-zero chance that things go to shit like shockingly fast. Um, like even if that's 5%, that's something I think we should be concerned about. So I heard someone talk about the paperclip hypothesis, which is that if the AI decides that its main job is to make paper clips and it decides that human bones are a good way to do that, then why would they not kill every human on the planet to make a couple more paper clips?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this for a long time. It doesn't seem this is why it seems very irrational with the rate of AI that it's going at. Even like some of the conversation we had, it seems like will be a moot point in like 2 minutes. But
Yeah.
we're putting like a Band-Aid on. They're like, oh, no cell phones in school. Well, we won't need them. We'll have robots teaching our kids. It does seem like the computer is always trying to do the most rational, optimized thing, and humans are so irrational. It seems like the first thing that they would want to get rid of is humans. Like,
Yeah, these annoying gnats that are slowing
like,
us
why
down.
are these annoying people who have, like we've discussed, no clear risk evaluation? I mean, one of my favorite places to read anything about is behavioral economics, because we make zero sense when it comes to the way that we spend and think about and plan and deal with money. Most humans have like no concept of how irrational they are around it with their behavior around money. I saw a great Instagram meme actually that pointed this out kind of perfectly, and it was like me with my $9 Starbucks and my $12 sandwich after refusing to pay $25 for a bag.
25
At
cents.
the airport? No, at the
25
airport.
Yeah.
Like refusing to pay $25 for a bag fee.
Oh, for a bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
And
Well, wait till we start throwing sand at them, then they really won't like us.
You laugh now. Someday when you might be like, I should have had more sand. It is very, I have a lot more compassion for, it's a very hard, challenging, weird time to be. I think always it's been hard to be a parent, but there's been like a general way of parenting that was kind of passed on for hundreds of probably thousands of years.
Yep.
And now it's, I wrote about this for Deseret, just even being pregnant, how many like the abundance of decisions and options and choices that I had to make. And I asked my sister, who had a child much earlier, and she's like, I feel like a grandma hearing all you guys talking about what it's like to be a mom now, because even her kid, who's, I mean, like your eldest age, she was like, we didn't worry about this. And like, now they sleep in cribs with nothing. She's like, remember how many pillows and blankets we all had in our cribs?
Well, that's the thing. It's not just the number of decisions. It's that every decision is presented as if it is
Life or death.
incredibly important,
Yeah.
right? So that is super stressful for parents. I get so many calls to my practice, parents wanting advice on what we might call problems of daily living. So
Mm.
my 5-year-old says that she's afraid of the dark. What should I do? And you don't, this might be an awful business model, but you do not need a psychologist for that type of stuff. Most parents, I usually just ask parents, what do you think you should do? And I've never heard a terrible answer. It's almost always totally reasonable. And I say, try that. You don't need me. If
Yeah.
if it gets worse, if it's interfering with functioning, then reach out to a professional. But you don't need an expert for every last daily decision. And that might be the overall arching issue that we're facing, is this quest for expertise about everything.
Yes. Yes. And then there's so many experts. And at the same time, there's a complete collapse in our institutions and institutional trust. And so you truly have no idea where to turn. It was my brother and I were dying laughing because our mom sent us all like a thing about cinnamon recall. And my brother was like, did you get the text from mom about the cinnamon recall? He's like, I was a commercial fisherman. I should like read it exactly. But he's like 17 years of being a contractor. He's a fireman. He's like, I'm a fireman. I was sat as a child and we melted down lead bait. He like worked in a bait shop. He's like, we melted lead baits and smoked like 2 packs of cigarettes a day, but like the cinnamon's gonna get me.
I used to play with mercury when I was a kid. I would break thermometers and
Oh
play with
yeah.
mercury.
Yeah. I mean, it is funny. We were all laughing about it, like the cinnamon pandemic, and it's funny too because we're all adults. I was like, thank you for this update on the cinnamon, lead and potentially in cinnamon.
But that's that threat detector we have in our skulls again. Evolution is glacial in its change, and so our society has changed dramatically, but this looking for threats we have hasn't changed. And so if there's not tigers anymore that are going to kill us,
there's cinnamon.
Cinnamon is, and from our brain's perspective, it's the same thing. It's just as concerning. And so we can't even blame people. We have this machinery. It has to do something. It doesn't like sitting there.
And you're being bombarded with it all day long. You're getting bombarded with. This is why the climate change stuff is so intoxicating for people, because it's like, oh, like that really gives people, an actual reason to be anxious and feel like they need to glue themselves to the Mona Lisa or whatever.
Right.
But
that's a whole other.
It would be so weird to be in your position right now. The world needs you more than you know.
Well, here's the one thing that is really good about being a psychologist is no matter how crazy behavior appears to be, it actually makes sense to that person in that moment. And so it actually makes it easier to not be judgmental, because according to that person's life experience and learning history and understanding of the world, gluing your hand to the Mona Lisa actually is the most rational thing to do in that moment. So that makes I'm less outraged, I would say, than the average person, because I'm just like, okay, I don't know what the reasons are, but it makes sense to that person. Now, whether we want to fix that, that's another thing.
Yeah, I get a lot of crap for mocking people for doing that stuff. Even though I completely am on board with you, like a dumpster fire, the show I do is very much like faux outrage. sometimes there's real outrage, but it's usually that people are ignoring real things they should be outraged about. But there's I don't know. I got a lot of crap for mocking the people who were saying that they needed humanitarian aid or whatever. The like protesters who were talking about how they wanted basic humanitarian aid. They're like, they're just idealistic kids. I'm like, okay, but I got mocked as an idealistic kid, and this is just what we do as generations. They need to learn to take it from the olds and suck it up. They can make fun of us back for being old. This is the nature of this is every generation.
That does happen in so many ways. So I was doing research on the current reaction that people have to video games and cell phones, and how adults are so concerned about what's happening. If we look back to when TVs first came out and you read newspaper articles, you wouldn't know that we were not talking about social media. It's the same thing.
I know.
Even when radio came out, people were saying kids are just sitting around the radio. They're not outside anymore. So there is this,
I know.
This is another thing you learn as a psychologist, is these things are cyclical. And so don't get too excited, because we've all done this before.
The social media stuff and everything, it's bad. And yes, we're seeing kids who are more anxious and whatnot. I would also say a lot of that is because parents are more anxious than ever before. Again, it's not just the kids. The parents are, coming. I remember 9/11, and I was 21, and the adults had no freaking idea what was going on. And it was the first time where I was like, wow, these adults are in the same place I'm in that they're terrified and they don't have any clue what's going on. And the world that they know just was like whatever their psychology was something psychically happened. And I'm not really sure we ever recovered from that. And same thing in the pandemic, where it was like a bunch of adults who are in the same situation as their teenage kids. And so, yeah, of course you have all these anxious kids, because you have the parents always seemed like they kind of had a better sense of, I remember it even going so far back as the Challenger explosion, when we were all hyped up for this thing. Now, we didn't get grief counseling or anything like that, which I think kids today would. But they're like, oh, that didn't go like we expected. But I remember
people had to take, I think they had to take days off from school when certain people got elected, because they couldn't handle that.
I still have a joke about that. I was like, did planes fly when Trump was elected? Because it was like 9/11. You could hear a pin drop in certain cities. It's like, were planes allowed to fly? So I don't know, but I have seen, I'm kind of, and again, I don't know if it's the contrarian in me. I grew up with the TV panic, with everybody being like the boob tube and you're all going to be brain dead and whatever. And maybe we are, and we don't know it. And I had friends whose parents were adamant about them not watching TV, and they grew up in TV-free households, and they are no more or less well-adjusted than me now that I've seen this experiment play out.
And they can't make Seinfeld references to everything like you and I can.
No, they can't. They don't know they're weirdos. They're outside of the stream of life. So yeah, some of it is like, is this like another freak out that we're having around technology? I get very wary of asking the government to step in and do things that's where I'm like, no. We don't need, they can't, no. We can't have the government regulating this stuff for us. Whenever people are like, we're going
to have robot-free zones, robot-free playgrounds.
This is the appeal to authority, though, that everybody seems to, I was just talking, my friend and I did, I feel like a whole episode on Gen X, and it was like, we were so anti-authority. This like default appeal to authority is very strange to me. And I feel like these anxious kind of parents teach their kids. And it's the same thing, like appealing to an authority to fix something, appealing to an authority, tell me what to do if my kid's afraid of the dark. This appealed, Daddy Trump, fix this, Daddy, Biden, whoever your daddy is, like someone come fix this. That seems like a bit, like if I look at the overarching problem, that feels like something individually we actually can work on changing, which it sounds like your open therapy institute and all the work you're doing with, free range kids and stuff is starting to address, because it has to start with like the individual.
And there are so many easy ways to start putting the responsibility back on kids to handle discomfort and distress and disappointment, even with little kids. So a story I tell of, I was at a gathering and this little girl, she must have been 2, she was trying to take her sweater off and she got like stuck in the neck of it. And I'm just sort of watching and seeing what's going to happen. And I'm the only psycho who would ever notice anything like this. But Dad runs across the room, pulls it off. It would seem like the nicest thing to do. And I was like, oh, that was a little opportunity for her to notice discomfort and then problem solve and figure it out. And so it's not even that difficult to start pushing back on some of these things. Sometimes I just ask parents to spend 24 hours noting every time they step in. And I say, I still want you to step in. Don't change anything. I just want you to make a note when you're stepping in. And then the next day, I still want you to step in every time, but I want you to delay by 5 seconds before you do what you were going to do anyway. And in those 5 seconds, many times kids figure it out. And that starts the ball rolling. So it might sound overwhelming to parents to allow more independence, but you really can start so simply, like 20 times a day with doing some of these things.
I think it helps that I get cracked up by my child's frustration, where she'll just be like, ah! And like throw something. I'm like, it always makes me die laughing. I'm like, okay, you're frustrated. Like, we can try again.
That sounds pretty good. So do you crack up and then label you're frustrated?
Yeah.
Oh, that's textbook.
I don't know if I'm doing anything right. I'm like, am I messing my kid up? And I'll be like, you're frustrated. It's okay.
You're teaching her that vocabulary of a feeling, and you're also saying, I don't necessarily. It's not my job to necessarily fix that for you. I see that you're frustrated.
Yeah.
See what you can do about it. That's really good.
She's pretty independent. It's tough though. She's definitely at that 2-year-old age where, and I didn't ever think I'd be the person that was still breastfeeding a 2-year-old, but she just never, like, people kept telling me, oh, they naturally wean themselves at 18 months, or my kid just gave it up at 2. And breastfeeding was one of those things, as a parent, all you ever hear is the stories of people who struggle to do it and feel less than. I didn't even know it was a thing where they could love the boob so much that they don't want to give it up. And now people are like, oh, that's so crunchy of you. You must be judging me. I'm like, this is not crunchiness. I don't know how to draw the line. Like, I don't tell me how to wean her. I know what I need to do. I just don't know how to do it. And I'm worried that it's going to become like I noticed it today in the pool. It was the first time, she's not ever done this, but it was the first time she was scared and she was like, booby. And now, she's like extra verbal for her age, which also makes it very weird. So I was like, oh, I'm going to have to deal with this somehow. Like, I don't know how to, I don't want you to, it's obviously like a source of comfort for her. And every pediatrician is like, oh, they get so many benefits and when you do it until like they're 2. But I'm like, I do not want the weird verbal kid who's like 3 years old being like, mommy, can I please have some booby?
Well, here's the thing. You don't need to consult with an expert. I bet you can figure this out.
Oh, I will figure it out. I'm not consulting with an expert about it. It's just like one of those things that I noticed where I'm like, oh, shit. I didn't even know this was a thing. And then I was talking to my best friend. She's like, oh, I had to wean my kid at 2 and it was a fucking nightmare. I'm like, oh, no. I didn't realize that this was a problem you could run into.
Right.
Things you don't know.
No. And if you ask 2 experts, I bet you they'll give you different advice anyway.
Yeah, one would be like, oh, she'll just like, it's her thing. She'll just do it naturally. Like, and it's so cute, you know? It's so hard because now she's negotiating and I'm using it to teach her math.
I don't even, I can't even imagine what you mean, but
Because she's like
math.
5 minutes, and I'll be like, okay, 5
Oh,
minutes. And then she'll be like 1 minute, and I'll be like, what's 5 + 1? So now she's learning math, but I'm like, I don't know if this is this is helpful to
you might be
anyone.
onto something.
Maybe. I should probably be teaching her how to throw sand at robots.
Hmm.
Well, I love your work. I love your whole everything that you're doing. I think it's so important. That's why I wanted to talk to you. I would love to have you back anytime. I hope you write this book and write it soon for me. Thank you. um
Thank you so much for having me on. I've been a fan for a while. This
oh,
is
I
fun
just love your
to
I'm
talk
so
to.
glad that you were in Abigail's book, and I'm so excited to see all the stuff you're doing. I think it's really great and unfortunately necessary, but I'm glad you've taken up you and a lot of other people I really respect have taken up the mantle, or is that a word? Taken up
Yeah, I think that's a word.
yeah, is that a word?
But English
Uh,
is not my first language, so I'm on.
um, what is your biggest defective character?
Oh, is that something you it feels like that's something you ask everybody. Is that
Everyone,
true?
same two questions. They all
Oh,
get
there's
them.
another one. Okay. You didn't warn me about this.
No one gets a warning.
My biggest defect of character. Oh, I could give it sort of like an avoidance response about how character is not really a thing and we're all made up of learning history. Um,
Do it.
uh, well,
That would
I
be
mean,
original.
that would be original. Well, I think that contingencies are super important. And so if you have a behavior that could be called a defect of character, I would ask yourself, what is reinforcing that? And if those things can be changed, then it will look like you're making a change in your character, but you're just responding to different reinforcement. So, but it feels like a cop out.
Is this like habits make the man?
Yeah, and there's real truth to that.
Yeah.
I think I sometimes enjoy the fight a little too much, that and it gets me into trouble. I engage in fights that I don't need to and that are probably not in my best interest.
Sir, you're Colombian.
I'm Colombian and I'm Colombian with red hair, and so that means that I had to put up with a lot of people as a kid telling me things I didn't want to hear, and so I got used to fighting.
Yeah, yeah. I really understand that though. I understand that like this is where I think I really what I really liked about you though. Even if it's I think it's like the Irish in me. I have that just like I'm Italian, but there is like this thing that gets triggered where I really have to work against just like the love of the fight.
Yeah, I've gotten better at it over time. But yeah, sometimes people around me will say, Was that did you have to really engage in that particular one?"
You're like,
But
no, but it
oh,
made me feel so good. Yeah,
yeah, I don't
there's
like bullies.
no, I don't either. I don't either. There is that great in recovery, the thing that like saved me, pause when agitated or doubtful. And I had to kind of repeat that enough that now it's just default, where if I'm agitated or doubtful, I know it's kind of reverse engineered itself. Now I'm like, oh, this means pause. I'm
Yeah,
agitated. Don't do anything. And that
that's an
has saved
amazing
me.
skill. Yeah, we sort of talk about that as in my field as a reverse compass. So when you notice an urge to do something, if you get good at noticing that urge, actually over time that urge can become a signal to do the exact opposite thing.
That's what
And
this
that
is.
becomes a superpower if you can do that.
Mm.
So that is something that I've gotten better at over time. And a lot of modern cognitive behavioral therapy is about noticing an urge and then you can just listen to it every time, which is what most people do, or you can imagine that there are now a range of possibilities, including the exact opposite of what they are.
Mm.
And if you can do that, it's life changing.
This is how I cured myself of hypochondria. I should send you
Hmm.
the piece I wrote about it.
Sure.
I think because it was like something I didn't have money, so I didn't have a therapist, but I had like debilitating hypochondria. It was bad. And it kind of came out of nowhere. I never had anxiety or anything like that. And then I guess I did cognitive therapy on myself because I had read certain things here and there, like put a rubber band on your wrist and snap it, and then I would replace it with a mantra, and then I started noticing like what was coming up, and eventually I got a little bit more money and could start saying like, oh, this comes up around these things, and could take that to a therapist who could help me deal with it. But that
No,
was
that's
a
amazing.
dark time in
And
my life.
yeah, more people should do that. You don't have to go right to a therapist. You can do these other steps. And there's actually a bunch of research suggesting that like self therapy, if done correctly, can be almost as good as paying someone.
Yeah, it's weird. It's hard to get outside of the matrix of your own mind, but
Yeah.
but the thing about hypochondria that's so debilitating is it is like it's a mental illness. You know that it's your own mind attacking you. And
Yeah.
I really had to I gave it a name. I had to be
Oh,
I had
that's
to
exactly what we teach people to do. It's really good.
it was Beazle, and I was like, oh, that's just Beazle yapping his crazy talk again. And my sister kind of really struggled with this too, and she asked me for my help, and I was like, you've got to put it in a box and suffocate it. Like, what you feed lives and what you starve dies, and we need to starve this. I could feel like my brain resisting those grooves that it makes.
Yeah.
It was
That's
nuts, honestly. It was one of
what
I've
you're
been through a lot of different recovery, and that was one of the most challenging because it was centered in my own brain. It wasn't like a substance that I needed to get
right.
off.
What you're describing is a technique that we call cognitive diffusion, and it's one of the most powerful techniques that we have in cognitive behavioral therapy. And it is taking a thought or a feeling you're having and just projecting it onto something else. So it could be, you
Mm.
could pretend there's a radio in the corner of your room, and I like to imagine like an old-timey radio, and your thoughts are coming out of there, or it's spelled out in clouds, or
I
uh,
love
it
that.
it's I have a client who Donald Trump, he puts in Donald Trump's voice, or I've had clients who put it in somebody else's voice. And you don't even have to do anything differently, but once you see it outside of you, it loses power.
Yeah,
It's pretty amazing how that works. So
it
that's an
is
easy
amazing.
technique for anybody to do.
Oh, it's also I read this really early in like a meditation book too, is if you really sit and listen to your brain and start really identifying it as like a crazy person sitting next to you on a couch, would you allow, because you're just like, shut up. It is, I think I find meditation to be very helpful with that kind of practice of separating yourself, putting some distance between yourself and
Yeah.
where do thoughts come from?
Uh, where did thoughts come from? I think there's a lot of disagreement about that, and that gets into the whole free will debate. Do we
Consciousness.
create our thoughts, or are we just watching what is being created by our neurons? Uh, I don't have a great answer to that, so
Mm.
I'll leave it at that.
What's your biggest asset?
My biggest asset. I like to keep things really simple, and many people in my field like to complicate things, and so
Hmm.
that has served me really well. And this independence treatment is a good example of that. I wrote a manual. It's like 5 pages. It's super simple. You can download it for free from Let Grow's website. If you have any training, basically, you can do it. You don't need any extra training. And I just don't like a lot of extra details, and that has kept me kind of focused on solutions that tend to work for most people.
Mm.
And I don't like to listen to other psychologists talk. They tend to complicate things and want to hear their own voice. So I'm simple, and I like that.
I love that. That's a good one. That was something that really saved me too in recovery. If you want self-esteem, do esteemable acts. I was like, that's very simple advice.
Yeah.
I
And
wish I
that's
had had
totally
that when I
true.
was very young. Like,
Yeah.
that seems like a very complicated thing. That's like all this like self-esteem is this and that and this. And it's like, no, just do esteemable acts
Totally
and
agree.
you'll
And
have
so
self-esteem.
many parents call me, how do I increase my child's self-esteem? What is your kid doing? What can your kid do that's different than that? That's how you get. And independence therapy is exactly that. It's self-esteem building. There are no
Mm,
words that make someone have more self-esteem. It
yep.
is doing hard things.
I think that is really at the crux of what I've been asking everyone who's come on this podcast who's in your field. For all of the lip service that we have around mental health, there's never been a more attention paid to mental health, and there's never been more therapeutic language just in the zeitgeist than now.
Right.
And yet it seems like everyone's sicker than ever before, but it's because it's all
Yes.
based up. It's not active. It's all in your
Yeah.
head and words and jargon.
So if you, to your listeners, if you're in therapy now and all you do is talk, you're probably not in good therapy.
Should they be dancing?
They should be active. So both within session and between session is where 90% of the work should happen. You should be trying new things. Behavior change does not happen from talking about it.
Yeah. Another thing they always said in recovery is that you can't think your way into different actions, but you can act your way into different thinking. Another very simple
It
tool.
sounds trite, but it is totally true.
It's so true. It is so true. I mean, that's all that getting sober is. It's opposite day. You're like a kindergartner in or preschool, and it's opposite day, and everything you want to do, you don't do, and everything you don't want to do, you do. And that's how
And
you
then
get sober.
do that again,
Yeah.
every single day forever.
And then it gets easier.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, not easy.
That's right. So as an example, I sometimes have my clients do really simple opposite action, like you're hungry, you sit down at a meal, you put some food on a fork, and you just watch it for 10 seconds, even though you want to stick the fork into your mouth. Little baby acts of resistance like that can build this muscle of not immediately doing what your brain tells you to do. So many of them.
Wow. I love your work. I really do. I'm so impressed with. I just think it's so cool. I think psychology is just fascinating because, like you said, everybody has a good reason for why they're doing what they're doing. But this puts people in a very uncomfortable position if they actually sit there, because then you're like a dirty centrist or something, politically. It's like, this is my question. I'm like, if everyone thinks they're on the right side of history, this seems like a bad place for us to be.
Well, one thing is explaining why you did something, but the other thing is asking yourself whether continuing to do that behavior is consistent with your values. And the answer can be, I totally get why I did this. This is not consistent with my values, and I don't want to do it anymore. So it doesn't accept all manner of misdeed to be understanding about why someone did what they did.
Yeah. We just launched the Touch Grass Challenge on Phetasy, and it's like, because I'm trying to shore up people's soul defenses for the upcoming election, which I know is going to be insane. And it's very simple. It's like very simple things that I shouldn't have to put on a list for people to do. But it's like, go to a museum. I just want people like in real life doing things. And people are like loving it. It's so crazy. They're posting all their pictures of like the things that they're doing and the events. And there's a community around like being in the world, which is so cool. And people are excited about it. And it's like it's very simple. Like, be in nature, volunteer your time. It doesn't have to be anything big. It can be like babysitting for a family member or making food for somebody. It just not being like taking an hour out of your day and giving it to somebody else. Not
You're describing what we call in my field behavioral activation, which is one of the most effective treatments for depression.
Ah,
This type of stuff.
interesting.
Yeah.
Where can we find you?
DrCamiloOrtiz.com. Should I spell that, or will
We'll
you
put it in the
put that?
description.
Okay.
I mean, you can,
Um,
but if anyone's listening, just go to the description and we'll put all of your links there.
and Twitter. And then if you're a therapist and you want my independence manual, go to letgrow.org, and there's a link for professionals, and you'll see independence therapy. You just give your email and then you'll get my free treatment manual.
Awesome. And where are you on social media?
Just Twitter.
So people can see you fighting. Just kidding.
Yeah, not I don't fight so much, but yeah, Dr. Camilo Ortiz on Twitter.
Awesome. If you're ever in Austin, we would love to have dinner with you.
That'd be amazing.
That would be so fun. Thank you for coming through.
Thank you so much.
The check-in with Bridget and Cousin Maggie can now be found at Phetasy.com. It's been titled Another Round with Bridget Phetasy, and it's now in video.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.